Yeah, thanks a lot, Miriam. Thanks, Ambassador Ackermann. Dear colleagues, thanks for being here with me. It's a pleasure. So I have a series of questions to all of you, and we'll go through them before we then open for questions from the audience. Yeah, let me start with you, Ambassador Ackermann. We've also heard this at the Senate reception inaugurating this year's India Week yesterday. India is changing fast. To some, it's a new India we're seeing, and for those outside of it, it may at times be difficult to keep up. You've been Germany's ambassador to India since 2022, but before this, from 2007 to 2010, you had been stationed to India already. So from your personal experience, perhaps, what have been the most notable changes since then?
So I would say the most noticeable changes are in infrastructure. It is striking when you come back after 15 years how India has changed. I always quote, in 2015 there were 72 airports, and now 10 years later you have 164 airports, and that in 15 years time. You can go from Delhi to Agra in less than 2 hours on a kind of autobahn, which is quite good actually, and you have high-speed or semi-high-speed trains that bring you basically everywhere in the country. Second element is digitization, which is, for a German, really quite a striking experience. I mean, I pay the rickshawala with my phone, and also every cup of tea, 15 rupees you can pay with your phone, and the affinity to IT and digital communication, even in the sort of most rural areas of India, is striking. There is not one poor family without a smartphone, and everything, every subsidy the state channels to these people goes through the smartphone. And that means in many ways, not in every way, but in many ways, that corruption is of course reduced also. So I think what also is very noticeable is a growing middle class. You see more wealth, more prosperity, you see prices have gone up, life has become much more expensive, of course, because the market is bigger and bigger. And people are much more globally thinking with this middle class development. So many more Indians go to study abroad than before. Many more Indians think of careers outside India than before. So there is a very, skillful, courageous, and bold way of thinking one's future. Outside India, including outside India, that's also a possibility. The country has been polarized. It's much more polarized than it used to be. There is much more confrontation than it used to be. But that's a phenomenon we see everywhere. It's not only India, of course, as we see it everywhere. So I would say that the India of today, when I compared when I left in 2010, has changed in dramatic ways, more than I would have expected, and it is striking to see how many things you discover. At the same time, and that is true for everything in India, is many things haven't changed at all. There is, of course, mainly in the countryside, there is, of course, this old social structure that's very much prevailing. You have very old patterns that are not breaking up as easily as one would think, and religion and what was very significant for Indian society is still very, very much there. So I think you have elements of the society that have been changing profoundly, and you have, on the other hand, you have a very long tradition that is very difficult to break up, and it's still there.
Wonderful. Sharinee, I have a question with regard to your sort of personal background also. You studied international relations and Indian foreign policy in Oxford prior to coming to Germany. Now you're in Berlin taking part in Germany's foreign policy debates. So from your experience, how do German debates around India differ from those in the UK, with a different history, obviously? And in how far perhaps do you see room or limitations also for cross-trade European cooperation vis-a-vis India?
Thank you, Johannes. It's so wonderful to be here. And also, you forgot that I was at GIGA for a big part of my PhD time.
True, yeah.
I did an exchange here, so I had the benefit of being here. So one of my first reactions to the differences between India and the conversations around India in the UK versus Germany is that obviously UK has a historical relationship with India. So India and the conversations around India is far more embedded into the lives of every other British person. In fact, being Indian is very much a part of British identity, whether it's chicken tikka masala is their national food, British national food, or whether it is the culture and identity and people are speaking of India. And a lot has to do with the fact of sort of how India is taught in the UK. GIGA is a big exception to, I feel, what happens in Germany. GIGA is one of the places where India and South Asia are featured as one of the main research programs, whereas in other parts, it's not so much. So I feel like there is a gap in the understanding of the everyday German vis-a-vis India. But that is, I would say, also changing in my view. I am seeing a lot more interest in India coming from in Germany, and I'm also seeing sort of more cultural exchanges as well. The other thing that's very evident is the migration and mobility agreements between Germany and India. There is an influx of Indian students coming to Germany. I'm personally very happy. In Berlin, we found our first Mumbai street food restaurant, which I have validated as of this weekend. So that's just to say that there is more cultural integration, but it's still a long way to go. And I also feel like in the UK, for example, there are things like the Jaipur Literature Festival, which is a big literature festival that's in Rajasthan, but they have an edition of that in the British Library. So these are things in the way in which you can bring and mainstream India into everyday German life. So it's happening, but still some time to go, I would say.
Thanks. Yeah, that brings me to you, Sangeeta. You came to Hamburg for the first time 7 years ago, and we're lucky you've stayed since then. From your perspective, have German perceptions of India really meaningfully evolved, or do we still see the relationship framed through outdated lenses, perhaps? And relatedly, you mentioned migration, Sharinee. Do you see the Indian diaspora playing a stronger role in shaping bilateral ties?
Thank you, Johannes. When I first came here, I couldn't find many people who looked like me on the streets. But now there seem to be so many of them here. So there is this, when you talk about, so I wanted to find out what was happening. And the best place I go is Instagram and social media, because that's where you actually get to know how at least a group of people are looking at each other, how they are conceptualizing and seeing each other. Because we can always read textbooks and newspapers, but that's where the conversation is happening. So there has been a perception evolution from the time I came in 2018 till now. What I do see is that it differs, because if you are in the student category, you see there is a lot of common venting happening, but at the same time, people want to be in Germany, and Germans are also reaching out to Indian culture in a big way. I saw a lot more groups coming up in social media, because this is the place that I can see as well as here, more groups which have come beyond just what we were discussing about yoga, but actually to find out about the geopolitics of it, the roots, the Asian roots. And there are specific groups in which, for example, students from Indian universities actually reach out, and they have these student hubs in TikTok and in Germany, and in India, Instagram Reels, where they collaborate with each other. And at the ground level, we see a kind of image makeover happening. So if this is integrated at the policy level, I see that this can lead to more understanding between both cultures, and we can break stereotypes from both sides in this. When it comes to just slightly about migration, there has been this huge influx of Indian students, right? 50,000 Indian students, and almost a year rate of 10% increase. So I get a lot of from my students in Calcutta Presidency and Jadavpur University, as well as not just technical universities, but also from social sciences. I'm seeing more and more students reaching out. I did not know about so many parts of Germany before I came here, but now the bachelor students in India are coming and reaching out to me and asking me about what's the opportunity in Germany. This is the next place to be. My nephew wants to come here. So I do see something positive happening at the level of the people to people exchange, because we are living in a space that is unmediated also. So I see a lot of opportunity here for the government to come in and not set the narrative. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. All right, let me go back to the title of this event. Miriam mentioned it already, India's sweet spot in geopolitics. Ambassador, you mentioned infrastructure. Miriam, you mentioned economic growth. But also India has, quite successfully steered clear of some of the major conflicts we're seeing today. The Russian invasion of Ukraine afterwards. New Delhi maintained its traditionally close ties with Putin's Russia, while also deepening relations with the US and European countries. And India likes to portray itself, or the Indian government likes to portray itself as a leader of the global South and promotes its image as, non-Western but not anti-Western. So in fact, I'd argue in many ways India's traditional foreign policy position of strategic autonomy or multi-alignment is vindicated by international politics, international realities today, including a more transactional international politics, a fracturing of binding alliances also in a multipolar world. So, Ambassador Ackermann, my question to you, in how far do you see today's India really in a position of strength globally? And what does this mean for Indian-German ties?
Oh. I have to speak for a long time, I guess, but let me try to be short. I think this multi-alignment approach, they used to come from non-aligned, and now they say that they're multi-aligned. That's a bit of a euphemism, I would say. It's not really a new phenomenon. That is possible if you keep away from things. But at the same time, I think India wants to have a seat at the table. They want to sit next to China and to the US and maybe to Russia also. And when you want to have a seat at the table, at some stage, this multi-align theory does not work anymore. So you have good relations with Israel and good relations with Iran. You have good relations with Russia and good relations with the West. But at some stage, if you want to step in, you have to take some decisions. I don't think that needs to be an alliance in the classical Western style. Our DNA is alliance, and in Germany in particular, because alliances saved us after the war, as it were. But that will never be the case in India. But I think what you feel when you talk with the Indian government is that there is a sort of a screen for the outside where we keep all the multi-alignments and being friends with everyone except Pakistan and maybe China. But for the rest, we try to be friends with everyone. But when you step inside the government's action plan, then you see that there are countries that are dealt with in a much more detailed and much more forthcoming way than others. And first and foremost, that's the US. I mean, there is no other partner for India that is so important than the US right now. US is the main partner of India, and they basically put a lot of effort right now, as everybody does, to get the US somehow on their side. So that's very difficult, and when we see what happens now with the trade deal with the US and India, it will be extremely complicated. But I think that you see in this, effort to get a seat at the table that there is differentiation between the partners. Now, what does it mean for Indo-German relations? I think we should not forget that Germany is basically, I keep telling that it's Tamil Nadu, it's one Indian state. It's exactly 84 million, like our population. It's a powerhouse in India, but it's still a sort of medium-sized state in India, maybe a bit on the bigger size. So we are a small partner for India. We have to realize that, we are not playing in this top level US, China, maybe Russia to a certain extent, although I think Indians realize that Russia is also not that much a performing world power. But on this level where we are right now, I think we have maybe the most differentiated partnership with India of all these Tamil Nadus around us, UK or France, and because our relationship is based on so many pillars, not only business, which is very important, but also cultural and academic cooperation. On migration issues, we were talking about that before, and I think your observation is very poignant, because we have now 300,000 Indians all of a sudden in Germany. And we have our partnership in the green and sustainable development. So there is so many pillars on which this relationship is based that I think we have a very, very sound friendship in a way with India. It's never uncomplicated. There are always moments where we disagree, almost hiccups once in a while. But all in all, I think we have the best relation we've had so far since our 77 years of diplomatic relation right now.
Very interesting. Sharinee, so the globe is one thing, but India is also situated in a specific region with its own history and conflicts, obviously. How sweet is India's position really within South Asia and perhaps within the wider Indo-Pacific?
I actually agree a lot, Ambassador, with your comments, and even Miriam, yours and the opening remarks. I mean, I remember when we were talking about the title of this panel, India lived in a different sweet spot, and now India is in a very different sweet spot. And I think the flare-up with Pakistan was just one of those examples of where India wants to be and where India can be, because at the end of the day, it does live in a very difficult geopolitical neighborhood. And the historical rivalries between India-Pakistan and India-China go very, very deep. So on the one hand, India has been trying to navigate the world, and the logic of an Indian sweet spot came from this idea that India is a very important and consequential power in light of the great power rivalry between the United States and China. So India's so-called sweet spot would emerge in that narrative, where India would sort of perhaps even get away with things like a nuanced position on Ukraine, for example, given the fact that it is this great power or in the global south with the potential, if at all, in terms of size, in terms of population, in terms of growing economy, to balance the global balance of power, basically. But that has changed, and we are seeing that now because India had hedged, and Ambassador, you're absolutely spot on with the fact that India's relationship with the United States is extremely powerful, and that has been one of the bones that China has had against us, even though there is a huge disparity between India and China in terms of power capability, military capability, economic capability. The United States, and at least China, was also looking at India's relationship with the United States as the one thing in India's sort of bag of balancing. But what we're actually seeing now in the region has changed that perception. India's relationship with the United States was not always good. I just want to caveat that in a sort of space of history, right? So Indian diplomatic machinery worked from the 1990s to make India be seen as an Asia-Pacific power, and then from the Asia-Pacific, an Indo-Pacific power, and from an Indo-Pacific power, it was it came into the US framing of the region. So India worked its way through these regional imaginations to become then a part of sort of the US balance of power and the US sort of partner. But obviously now we're seeing a change, and that's because of the unpredictability coming from the US administration. I don't think India is alone in feeling these anxieties. I mean, I feel Europe, it's quite interesting because now I'm sitting at the German Marshall Fund, right? And my whole academic life, PhD life has been sort of explaining India to the world, and now I'm sitting on the other side and seeing how the transatlantic relationship is dealing with some of the same challenges that India is dealing with vis-a-vis the great powers. What we saw happened with Pakistan was the United States sort of claiming to play a very important role in the ceasefire between India and Pakistan. And this has really crossed a red line for India. And these are the things where India is kind of realizing that even if it may hedge its bet, and even though the United States the relationship between India and the United States goes beyond who's sitting in the White House, at the end of the day, there are going to be certain red lines, and this is definitely one of them. So in that sense, Ambassador Ackermann, I don't think Germany is very small. I think Germany is a very important power for India in that sense, if it wants to play this game that it's trying to play. The European Union is a key region that Germany has to work with. I think it was unprecedented that the whole College of Commissioners had come to Delhi in March. And there is a real opportunity for both these parts of the world to come together. And I'll just leave this part of the panel with one point. The thing is, okay, when you look at India and Germany, you will see a country of the size of Tamil Nadu versus a subcontinent. But when you see the European Union and India, you can actually understand it better, because dealing with India is quite continental in many ways. On the trade side, this is sometimes a frustration for New Delhi, because they don't really, the free trade agreement negotiations have been impending, and that's because also there has to be some expectation management on the Delhi side on how the European Union works. What are the things that can be negotiated at the super-regional level, and what can be negotiated at the bilateral level? So just to kind of put into context sort of where Delhi what Delhi is navigating right now, which is not very different from what many countries are navigating now, which is an immense period of geopolitical volatility and unpredictability. And I'll stop there for now.
If I may come in very briefly, because I think you've mentioned one thing which is extremely important, that's the European Union. For the first time in my Indian thinking, which goes way back, the Indians have understood what the EU means for them. And that's, I would say, quite a step, because the EU is a complicated thing, I mean, it's not easy to understand. And the Indians have understood that this is the Indian foreign policy is basically, you can sum it up in one little phrase, and that phrase sounds, what's in it for me? Yeah? And the European Union and the Indians have seen what is in it for them in the European Union. And that I find really, really great. Trump, in his own way, helps a lot. So I think that we have seen a movement towards an EU-India rapprochement, which is really fascinating. I am very optimistic that by the end of this year, we have some framework of an agreement, an FTA agreement. If you had asked me last year at the same time, I wouldn't have been so optimistic, but now I am. And that, I think Trump helped, but this visit you are mentioning, that the president of the commission came and 21 commissioners along with her made huge impression. And the message of President von der Leyen was clear and loud. She said, we are the reliable ones. You can trust us. We keep our promises. And you can, when we agree on something, you consider that it is agreed upon. And that, in these current circumstances, is quite a message. And I must say, kudos to the Indian governments. They took it, and I think that's, in that way, I fully agree with you. The EU is a hugely important partner for India. In this framework, Germany is also important. I don't want to belittle Germany, but when you know Germany, you live in Berlin, sometimes we tend to overblow the influence this country has. And when you live and work in a country like India, you get cut to size in a way. And I think we should not forget that. We are the big ones in Europe, but when you go to India or to China or elsewhere, we get another dimension. That's what I wanted to say.
Wonderful, thank you. Sangeeta, so from what we've heard so far, does India really have many friends in your view? And what are the strengths really that India has that makes it an attractive partner, if not a friend, not just to us here in Germany, but beyond?
Okay, so these are two questions, and I'm going to break them down like this because they deserve a bit of understanding into how India's mind works, which I never claim to have expertise over. Okay. So you have friends of heart and you have friends of minds, right? And India is always like a Libra. It's somewhere in between, trying to balance both. And if you go then in diplomatic circles within India, I was talking to Mahima Dugal, a researcher here, and we were talking about how does India define friendship? So we went back a few decades to understand this, and we saw that India has a graded and a guarded level of friendship, right? So this is, and that gradation of who is our friend and to what extent should we invest our hearts and minds and our money into this friendship and our time into friendship depends on this calculation which is made from both sides, which is maybe values, maybe strategic alignments, maybe national interests, and a combination of both. And we saw that this is called differentiated strategic partnerships. At just at the entry level, which is pretty high, we have strategic partners. And it's pretty good relationship because the economic relationship, the military relationship, all of this works well at the policy level. May not be during crunch time, strategic partners, during real life conflict. India has this realistic expectation, they won't come and state that, oh, we are with you, right there. After that, you have the comprehensive strategic partners. It's a bit of a higher level of engagement. So strategic partners is still Germany there. Comprehensive strategic partners is like Australia, UAE, where the expectations, like Sharinee was talking about expectation management. The expectations are higher from India's side that if we are in a conflict with Pakistan, you need to at least say something in the United Nations or be with us, if not fight with us or be allies with us. Then at a higher level, you have the strategic partners, the privileged and the global partners, the privileged, strategic and global partners. You have they are the very important ones like Japan. You also have Russia, which is special and privileged strategic partners. All these are not, and then you have the defense partner like United States. That's the only country that is in that. It's not that I'm just throwing away these terminologies. These are all there in the official doctrine. And all of this leads to how many friends do you have. And this depends on, is this my midnight friend? Will I call this friend when I'm in a war or crisis? So they would call Russia, or they would call, they would call some other country like France. France has been the midnight friend of India from EU because during the Pakistan conflict at the United Nations, France actually made a statement in support of India. No one else did, right? So do you have that, friends? UAE, somewhere here, but it still gives support to India. May not be to the extent. United States is now, who knows whose friend United States except for the MAGA and Trumps, right? It's like me, myself, and Irene type of thing, right? So it is that kind of different partnership. So this is how India's mind works about friendship. So it's not that we are not friends at all. You are my best friend, you are my this friend, and this is all official. So to know how much India is going to commit to a particular relationship, someone might just see what is this level. And these labels of strategic partners, comprehensive strategic partners, special and privileged strategic partners, defense partners, civilizational partners like Thailand, Myanmar, Vietnam, all of these, where how much of soft power relationship is involved, how much of hard power, how much of a mix is involved, these terminologies can change depending on mutual investment into this relationship, right? So this is one of the things I talk about, the friendship. Now you asked me about Germany and India, right? Or what? What was it? I forgot.
Well, yeah, I was more interested in
whether it's an attractive partner overall,
yeah,
right?
Overall, yeah.
Right. So here India might be a very attractive partner in terms of if you think with your mind as a friend, not friend as a mind. Like otherwise, others who do have some value alliances with the India of the current age, which is a bit of a different India than it was in 2014. then depends on how much you're going to give into the soft power. But India is anyway a heavyweight power. It's just to give you a perspective. India's military is the world's second largest active military, 1.45 million strength. This is from Global Power Index 2025. EU's collective military strength is 1.5 million active military strength. India's economy in GDP nominal terms is, like fourth largest. By purchasing power parity term is also coming up to that, higher length. See, I don't see the economy because I'm very skeptical of data that comes out. So, but despite that, India is a heavyweight partner, and it is an attractive partner because it is leading when there is so much of protectionism happening. I hope EU doesn't go, because I'm really getting scared of what I'm hearing with the EU. EU needs to know that the world is not the US, the world is not the China, world is also beyond that. You have strategic intermediaries and third contending power, where India is amongst, not the most important, but amongst the most important in terms of cutting edge AI that is coming up, as you want to do space technology. This current conflict showed something very important about India's leading to low cost, high yield, effective space tech missile technology. India is very good at not proprietary models, but open source AI. This is very good for countries that want to fasten their economic turnaround, like EU. India is also a very attractive partner in skill sharing, in knowledge transfer, which India is doing in a big way. Also in crisis times. Who wouldn't want to, like during the Iran conflict, India was very proactive in evacuating citizens, not just Indians, but other countries. So crisis diplomacy also, India is doing this. Maybe not tom-tomming as it usually does, but it has been, so it is an attractive partner. This goes without saying, but there are certain areas in which it is really, really attractive from the mindset. From the heart, I don't think we are all into that side now.
I would like to make a provocative remark. So when we define friendship as between countries and states as we know it in Europe, I would say India has no friends at all, none. No? I agree with you with your sort of differentiation of partnership. That's true, but imagine that I give you a random example that Luxembourg and Germany have no market border in the middle of the Mosel River. So both countries administer the Mosel as a common river in a common commission. That would be completely unthinkable in India, completely. And I think India is not an exception. If you go to other countries in the region, they would say exactly the same. We come from a political environment, a context that values friendship in a way that we are also, friendship as something that we feel that we have to give also something in the friendship. We have to give up some of our positions for the sake of our friendship, let's say with France or Denmark or something. So that's the post-war experience of Germany, and that has led to a political understanding of a friendship of nations that led to a united Europe where, most, with the exception of the UK maybe, feel that they are European citizens nowadays and they feel befriended. That is, in a subcontinent of 1.4 billion people in India, unthinkable. That's too big a place, and this transactional, what's in it for me, I think what India does, for example, is, Pahalgam, the terrible terror attack that happened the disastrous terrorist attack happened. The Indian Foreign Ministry, the MEA, looks at the wording of the expression of solidarity, and it weighs their friends according to this solidarity expression, and you get marks, from the Indian side saying that. That is how we assess your solidarity expression. And that shows, this transactional character of the Indian reach out to nations. I don't want to criticize that, don't get me wrong. I think it's a global phenomenon, and I think it's completely transparent and very clear. There is no hidden agenda or something. You know what you see what you get, basically. There is no doppelter Boden, as we would say, no hidden agenda. But don't get the idea of what we feel friendship is like when you go to India. You have to set up a very decent and good partnership. And this is very possible with India. And I think we have come a long way. I think you are right when you say there are other countries like Australia that maybe have even a more developed partnership with India, and we might get there. But speaking of friendship, I would be very hesitant.
Yeah, I just want to two-finger on that, because I would also argue that India doesn't do friendship. And it doesn't do friendship because of also its own history and experiences. So when India emerged as an independent nation in 1947, one of the biggest things the foreign policy elite had realized is that we need to make friends with our neighbor on the east, because we already have a very difficult relationship with our neighbor on the west. And we tried that. There was an experiment. We had this with China. We called it Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, which means brother, brother. The joke was after the war, it became Hindi Chini Bye Bye, which is bye bye in English. But we learned those lessons, and we experimented with friendship, and we experimented with let's build trust with our eastern neighbor. And we gave up, actually, also, we gave Tibet. And Tibet was really an example of us trying to give up something unwillingly for a friendship. And then it didn't work. It didn't pay out. And that is exactly why, so that's why India's approach to not having friends, I agree, Ambassador, it's not a critique. It's just an experience out of its own foreign policy reality. And maybe one could argue that it just has to become an older nation, or it has to go through something very terrible, hopefully not very terrible, like the war in Europe, where Europe realized if we don't become friends and don't build trust, or not compelled to build trust, there's a bigger danger there. So India would have to kind of give up something. So I just wanted to sort of comment on that definition of friendship and how we see it in international relations.
Sangeeta, yeah.
Because I think this is very important, segueing from what Sharinee said, because why does this mindset of differentiated strategic friendship come in? Because if you see from the beginning of history, even I.K. Gujral, when we had prime ministers before, always spoke about the language of discourse was normative leadership, or bridge building, or friendship. These were the terminologies India used. I grew up at a stage when the terminology changed, and it was about, even Act East policy of India was having friends. And if you see the humanitarian diplomacy of India, India has given and done a lot of it. So I'm not saying that we don't feel that we have friends, but we have done friendship very well, from which lessons have been learned. That is what I say, the mind shift happened when India had a spate of terrorist attacks during the 2000s when we were growing up. And we didn't see that, I'm talking about the Indian, they did not see that there was a sense of abandon, and that was often also used by governments and all to say that, see, we need to have self-sufficiency and be a bit more realpolitik, because after all, you knew that Nehru was known by his idealism, right? So the mind shift takes place. Even for this, we don't have friends, you say. So during Pakistan, who came to support India, right? India sent delegations across the world, and Pakistan went and became it's obviously rotational in the UN, in the counter-terrorism, the VP, one of the VPs of counter-terrorism, right? So I think it should be also from the Europe to stand up and show India that we are also a friend in a more vociferous way, so that the message is conveyed that there is a friendship and it's quid pro quo in that sense.
All right. Friendship is a big topic. Let me just... we can return to that later if you... let's just briefly shift to another big topic. Technology, it's always also mentioned when it comes to India. Ambassador mentioned it earlier. So, and it's also been an overarching theme in the Focus on India document that the German government adopted last year. cooperation on new technologies. Maybe you can tell us a bit more where this comes from and what the potential gains for both sides are.
Technology is a rather vague notion, but I think what we have set up is a series of working groups between governments and non-state actors like business or civil society, where we talk about areas like green hydrogen, for example, which is a technology, or also about digitization. We have these working groups that meet regularly. But I think in addition to that, what we see as a sort of a unique element or level of Indo-German partnership is that we have these very, very many university or academic corporations on this. There is a super active Fraunhofer Institute in Bangalore. I mean, they are doing a great job in getting German business and Indian academia together in order to work on semiconductors, for example. And we have, with university partnerships, we have a very, very close and very good technology cooperation. So I would say that this technology element in a country that is very technology prone, like India, where you feel technology has made quantum leaps in the last couple of years, is extremely rewarding. I just mentioned upstairs that Germany started its academic cooperation in 1962 when IIT Madras, the very famous technical university in Chennai, was founded with the collaboration of RWTH Aachen, the famous German technical university. That is the cornerstone, I think, of this technical cooperation, and it goes, and that's the beauty of it, not only from government to government, but also to all the non-state actors, be that academia, be that business, be that civil society on this matter. Now, I give you one example. Mercedes-Benz has its research and development center with 8,000 engineers in Bangalore. So everything that is done on autonomous driving, on brakes, on digital driving is developed in Bangalore. 8,000 engineers, half of them women, also very important. You won't get that in Germany, I would say. And it's basically the brain of the development of Mercedes-Benz. And similar to that, you have, SAP has more engineers in India than in Germany. And Bosch is there for 40 years now, and I know more than 100 years, but in the new form it is since 40 years. So I think we are on the business level also very, very close in this technology. Now, one wonders what happens with this technology service providing India, which is top notch in the world, when AI comes, and I think it's not sure that this structure as it is now will survive at some stage, but until now, I would say it's, for us, one of the most interesting technology hubs in the world, and we are investing a lot in getting this partnership going.
Absolutely. Sharinee, at the GMF, you work on technology, right? On transatlantic relations and the geopolitics of tech. Maybe you can give us sort of a bit of a broader view of where does India come from when it comes to the geopolitics of tech, and what are its priorities, strategies beyond Indo-German relations, really?
So how we look at the geopolitics of technology at GMF is to also look at how technology drives great power competition. So what we've been really looking at is where the United States stands vis-a-vis China on this geopolitical and technology race. We also know that China has come out with this Made in China 2025, which is their vision of sort of where China sees itself in the technology race. And then the question is, where do countries like India come? And one of the things about sort of the global technology revolution and where India is seeing itself within that game is in previous technology revolutions. If you think nuclear technology, think industrial revolution, India was not a part of the rules that were made on and around those technology orders, right? So India didn't have a stake in how the nuclear non-proliferation regime was being established. India did not, it was on the receiving end, or rather the raw material side of the industrial revolution. So with the current technological revolution, Industry 4.0, India, very much, Ambassador, to what you said, wants to be seen as a part of the seat on the table. And one of the things that India is trying to leverage in this space is its role in this technology transformation. In the G20 2023, when India was the president of G20, one of the things it advocated for was digital public infrastructure, which was really trying to scale its ability to digitalize everyday services for Indians available to access their public services and things. And that's what sort of India will offer. So the idea is to decenter the narrative of the global technology contest and not only make it about the great powers like the United States and China, but also see the role of India. One of the projects specifically I worked on this at GMF was called Pivotal Powers. And it came out of this critique of swing states, which I know, Miriam, you share with me, where this idea of, countries like India are just swing states in this global context of power. No, these countries have power, they have agency, and the way in which they're claiming the agency in the geopolitical tech competition is by leveraging their competence on a tech value chain. So for example, if you look at the AI value chain, and without getting too technical into it, India has some of the largest quantitatively number of skilled AI talent. And just to speak to the point on your engineers, so India has a large part of sort of the human talent on this particular AI chain. So it will leverage that particular point on the value chain in its geopolitical conversations. So it's really about trying to see how the global technology contest is not just about the United States and China. It is also about India, and it's about also India wanting to make take its place in that context. And one example that I can actively give you was that in the G20, India really fought for the definition of what is a digital public DPI, digital public infrastructure, and that, to use some of the stuff done at GIGA on normative diffusion, it's that definition of a DPI that is now being circulated even at the UN level, at the higher multilateral organizations. So that's just to give you a sense of sort of how India is trying to be a part of sort of the order, the global order that is taking shape on the technology context. And that's sort of how we look at it at GMF and how I personally like to look at it in my work.
Wonderful. Maybe just to dig a little deeper on this, Sangeeta, a challenge shared by both Germany and India is to increase resilience vis-a-vis a more competitive adversarial international landscape. So where do you see overlapping interests also, especially when it comes to cyber resilience?
Okay, so this is, recently I presented a paper at the Federal Foreign Office because in the past 6 months, let me start with an example. Germany had its elections. Traditionally, we think of cyber resilience as cyber security concerns, attacks on physical infrastructure. Post-agentic AI, post-AI, the definition has changed slowly and slowly. Now, when you talk about adversarial landscape, in Germany, it usually comes from Russia and China combined. In the past 6 months, there have been more than 177 attacks, according to BFP. In all of this, what we see is a new kind of cyber resilience coming, which I call an integrated cyber resilience, which is cognitive resilience. That means an enemy won't attack your physical infrastructure only. They won't attack the telecom grid only. Or say, for example, your banks. They will also attack societies, mindsets, not just machines. They will try to erode. They are playing a longer game here. They will try to erode the trust for you to use those services. So this integrated concept of cognitive resilience is called cyber resilience, which is when both Germany and India share overlapping concerns because this is a new kind of enemy one is facing. And here you simply can't talk about technology. You have to think beyond technology. Here I just want to add one thing to the audience because when I say something like AI, we are in an age of AI which is general purpose. is not like technology as we knew it before, because it impacts every aspect of our life. That's why it's called general purpose. And whoever controls the rules, the capacities, as well as the implementation and supply of this general purpose technology will call the shots. And that is why cooperation between India and Germany becomes so important, because what was the attack that Germany faced? It was by the Russian 1516, that is the group that did something called Operation Doppelganger. It was a kind of a cyber attack where a huge number of population were targeted through the high precision, mass scale, a very different kind of disinformation attack that we have not seen since last year. This year happened. They mimicked what is called typo squatting. They mimicked, like URL, somebody would wrongly put in data, and they would mimic actual newspapers to target people's minds. Targeting banking systems simultaneously while targeting minds. This is a kind of a parallel attack happening. And for that, you need to develop your expertise on the foot. And India has developed that expertise over a period of time, because apart from being top-down disinformation, it's also faced a lot of external disinformation, right? So, you have to beat the enemies at their own game, right? So there was, between Germany and India, may not be the same enemies except China in some extent, but there are the same threats, the same nature of threats. And here, both have actually, like in my paper, I write that there have already been efforts to red teaming efforts, that is, where they jointly do threat simulation, they try to find out, create an early warning indicator system, cooperate in this, map these threats which are coming, and develop expertise and skills together. Sharinee made an important point here talking about India stepping up to the game when it came to the AI rules and regulations. In February this year, another thing happened. US is now going more into removing all the guardrails when it comes to technology being misused and misutilized for disinformation, for cognitive warfare. Platforms are getting even more and more powerful, though. And at this point of time, Russia has gained huge expertise. China has gained huge expertise, right? And during the Paris AI summit, we saw something very sad. It was a talk about, for innovation, we should not forget about regulation. We should not regulate tech. Over-regulation is bad. Regulation is ethics of technology. So it is largely used. And here, India actually led. It was the co-host with France. It was the co-organizer, president, I think, of the Paris AI summit. And it actually took, and EU was getting very scared. Hanna Virkunen started talking about, the head of the EU, started talking about EU digital sovereignty, EU stack, let's do innovation, remove all regulations. But EU was known as a leader of good technology. It had a credibility in its reputation. And if it loses that by getting a bit scared of what is happening in the US, then that would be sad. And that is where I found Germany stepping up to the plate, coming and saying, let's take a step back. And here, both India and Germany have actually started. This is what I'm tracking in my paper. How are they actually cooperating with each other? It starts with the values of human rights-based, inclusive technology, of technology that doesn't run roughshod over people's rights, given it has such a massive impact, which it did not have in everything else, from jobs to security to your everyday aspect of your life. And you are feeding your own biases. So if there is a value alignment, regardless of whatever distrust, at least at that level, if there is a value alignment about a trust-based system, reliable system, about a human rights respecting technology, then both the countries can do a lot together, and they've already started doing a lot together, starting with the student exchange, excellence clusters, as well as regulation, policy mapping.
All right, thanks a lot, Sangeeta. So this is a final round of questions, and we'll then open to the audience. Ambassador, we've now talked about technology. Two other key themes, you also mentioned them in the bilateral agenda between India and Germany: trade, especially the conclusion of a free trade agreement with the EU, as well as an evolving security partnership, including more German arms exports to India. Maybe you can tell us a little more about, how these priorities relate to the wider geopolitical context we live through now, and whether they're really shared by the Indian side.
So trade is, I think I said everything on the FTA. Trade is, the German Indo-German trade is going up. We have a trade volume of $33 billion a year, which is by far the biggest in the EU and is one of the biggest overall. But when you see that we have 240 billion with China, it's still a small part of trade, but it's going up, and I think we will see that in the coming years. When it comes to security, that's an interesting thing, because I think the German government has shifted here. So we, after the Ukraine war, the war of Russia in Ukraine, we felt that it is unwise for other countries to rely exclusively on Russian military equipment. And that was the case in India, where you had over 70, maybe almost 80% of their equipment was Russian for a long, long time, since basically independence was Russian. And that matched the Indian thinking. India was not as convinced by the Russian equipment as it used to be. India wanted to modernize its armed forces, wanted to be more of a deterrence force in the region, and therefore was willing to move to other providers. Our argument was very simple. We said, you can't, and I'm talking about the previous government, which was a center-left government with a strong green component that was very reluctant to sell arms to outside NATO partners. But our argument was very clear. We said, if you want to loosen the Russian embrace in India, you have to put something on the table. You can't just say, no, I'm sorry, we don't want you to buy Russian equipment, but we unfortunately, for principled reasons, will not sell anything. So that was a very simple argument, and I think the government, even the previous one, Mr. Habeck, who was at the end responsible for our arms export, agreed to that. And the second argument was we wanted India to be a strong force in the Indo-Pacific. We felt that in the sort of environment where China gets more and more bullish in the region, where we feel that smaller countries get harassed by Chinese behavior in the Indo-Pacific, we felt that it was very important to have a strong force that made impression on the northern neighbor in a certain way, and that also leads to a more active and more generous policy of arms exchange. Now, we are now at a point where we have one big project in the pipeline. That's not a secret. We want to sell. A German company, TKMS, wants to sell submarines to the Indian Navy. They have joined hands with a Indian shipyard, MDL, and now we are in the last phase of this process, and we do really hope. Our government has been pushing very hard for this deal, and let's hope that it sees the light of the day. But beyond this, we have a lot of dealing, when it comes to military technology, for example, radar systems by German companies that are very interesting for the Indian Armed Forces. So I think we are on a completely new level here. That is a decision, a deliberate decision by the government, saying that India is a strategic partner. We have interests that India has a strong and performing armed force, and we want to be contributing to that. And that's a new level. Now, you can say, and I think you mentioned that before, that France has been playing this card a long time. And they are, I think, in Europe, they are the preferred arms production partner. France is there. And I'm not sure whether we get on the level of France ever. But I think we have now reached a level of trust and cooperation that is, in 2 years, that is new and has not been there before.
Thanks. Yeah, all of this has a lot to do with Russian attack on Ukraine, obviously, but also with China, as sort of relations with China have soared across the Western world. But also India has a very complicated, you mentioned that earlier, has a very complicated relationship with China. Maybe, Sharinee, you worked on India-China relations in the past and still do so. Maybe you can tell us a little more on this, very peculiar relation that's often ill understood here in Germany. And also, maybe say something on whether India will eventually be forced to choose sides between, China on the one hand and the US on the other.
Thank you. Yeah, the India-China relationship actually is a very complicated one, and it goes back to sort of the way in which these nations were born and their emergence, and messy border management due to colonial histories. But just to contextualize sort of that story, they share a border of about 5,000 kilometers. And this has been hotly disputed. And the border also falls in very inhospitable terrain. And the recognition of India and China kind of fought a war over this border in 1962, which India lost. And this was a huge source of humiliation for India. Slowly in the 80s, both these countries started to turn towards each other. A lot had to a lot had to do with sort of the kind of end part of the Cold War, the falling of the Berlin Wall, which sort of also made India sort of look outward, look westward as well. And a part of that was also coming to terms with its neighbor. India and China, I know like in Europe, the words strategic autonomy and this language is fairly new, but India kind of had to navigate that much earlier just because of its geopolitical neighborhood. And India and China found a very interesting way to separate, I wouldn't use the word decouple, but to isolate the border dispute from other aspects of their relationship. And even today, you will see that India-China, if you just look at the trade, it's still high. So this is just to give you a sense of the fact that the rivalry is interesting because there is this border reality and this rivalry, but that hasn't really affected the other parts of that relationship. Now, of course, all of this was all hunky-dory. Well, it wasn't hunky-dory because there were times during this period where there were flare-ups on the border, but both countries had found border management protocols to manage it, de-escalate it, have the media statements here and there and save face and de-escalate. And just to give you a sense of sort of what some of those border agreements looked like, Indian and Chinese troops who are on the border are not actually allowed to have arms on the border. So if they are patrolling the border, they can only use handheld weapons. And in 2020, this was the first time when there was an actual clash between Indian and Chinese troops that actually resulted in fatalities on the border. Now, this was really a turning point for India-China relations. And then again in 2022, there was another flare-up in Arunachal Pradesh, India's easternmost state, which China claims to be South Tibet. So again, there have been escalations happening, but that's not to say that they're not trying to manage that dispute. There are negotiations, there are border management talks. But in general, I don't think the relationship can go ever before what it used to be in 2020. India is seeing China as a strategic rival. It wants from the West that recognition of the fact that there is an assertive neighbor at the border. And this is going to very much shape India's geopolitical position. And then just to kind of go on to sort of where I feel what India, I felt, wanted from Europe and what it's seeing, I think India is recognizing that Germany is willing to step up on the security relationship. In fact, I think India has also come to realize that Europe is invested in India's rise. And it is actually ready to put money into India's rise through security, through economic growth, through visits, high-level visits. And I think one thing we didn't mention, and that I think was very significant was the EU came out with a statement saying India has the right to its own self-defense when it responded to the Pakistan surgical strikes. Obviously, I'm talking about Pakistan and not China. But I'm just saying that this is exactly where the signaling is being recognized in India. And I just want to kind of one more thing add to this China thing, which complicates the relationship even more, is the relationship between China and Pakistan. So really, the two neighbors are rivals that kind of complicate sort of India's position in the neighborhood. So when you look at the map of South Asia, you think India is obviously preponderant, but it's not, because its power is kind of reduced or truncated by the China-Pakistan relationship. So it is a complicated one. I see that affecting India's geopolitical and foreign policy positioning a lot, but it is again nice to see Europe as a security actor or invested as a security actor. And the other thing that I've always thought about, Ambassador, but I don't know, maybe this has already been happening, but one of the things that India and China have in comparison, India has more patrols on the border, more physical presence on the border, but China has better roads. So what that means is that in an event of an escalation, tanks can get to that point much faster than it can in India. And something that I had always thought, because I look at German roads and they look pretty sturdy to me, I was wondering whether that could be another avenue for cooperation, because it doesn't need to be that, it doesn't have to violate Germany's own historical arms exports limitations, but this could also be another way in which Germany is investing in India's border security. And I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Many thanks. We have to conclude this at sharp. I'm very sorry, but the three of us, Ambassador will have to leave, but the three of us will be here for the reception. Happy to answer any question, engage in discussions. Thanks a lot for coming, everyone. Thanks, Ambassador Ackermann. Thanks, Sangeeta and Sharinee, for being here with me. It was a great pleasure, and I'm hoping to see you again very soon.